Welcome, everyone. The camera has started. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Grab a seat, grab a cookie. This is our 7th story night. That's kind of amazing. Lucky number 7. We're so glad that you have joined us. If this is your first one, you are in for a real treat. These just keep getting better, in my opinion. We just, as our staff, we kind of regularly marvel at the great people that come to Dwell. And if you have walked through our doors tonight, we consider you to be a part of that great community of people that call Dwell Church their home or that walk through our doors. We're just grateful that you've joined us. Something we say around here is that it does not matter what kind of church we plant, it matters what kind of God we believe in. And we're rediscovering what kind of God worth giving our entire lives to. We think an important part of that, of rediscovering that kind of God worth giving our lives to, is listening. And an old way, the way that many of us are accustomed to doing church, is listening to a very small number of people doing a lot of the talking. And something we say we want to do is be a listening church. Something that we do in our services every week, if you've never joined us for our regular weekend service, is we spend 2 minutes in total silence. It's super weird if you've never done it. We just sit in two minutes of silence because we believe that God has something he wants to say to each one of us. And we just listen. God, what might you have to say to me this evening? I'm in graduate school right now to become a licensed marriage and family therapist, and we spent a lot of time learning how to become better listeners. Amazing, the idea that a therapist would become a better listener. And something that they have us do is they encourage us to listen to yourself listen. Like, what's going on in me when I'm listening to someone else? And there can be a lot going on in me internally when I'm listening to someone else. And in my coursework this week, I heard someone say that listening is a practice of making the story of the other the center, and it requires me to do something active. So whether you know it or not, tonight you are not just a passive audience member. Communal storytelling requires a specific kind of listening. It requires deep listening. So it's going to require something of you tonight, to be active with your head and your heart and your mind and your body. So don't just sit there and sort of let the story wash over you. Be engaged with your mind. It's been interesting to watch these story nights develop over time. Like I said, this is our 7th one. And every time, regardless, I've just left in awe of the storytellers. It takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability and courage to stand up here in front of a room full of, some of them are, it's relative strangers to them, and to share something. And some of them have shared stories of deep suffering, of struggle and triumph, of deep loss, sometimes of church hurt, of abuse at the hands of someone that they trusted. And sometimes these stories felt like at the end there was like kind of a bow tied up, and sometimes they're in the messy middle, and tonight will be no different. And so at the end of each story, it sometimes can feel like, should I clap? Is there something I should do? It can feel awkward. And so at the end, we share a toast. And so if you have a sparkling water or a hot tea, we'll invite, each storyteller has written a little something they'll say. We'll toast to something at the end as a way just to mark the end of their story and a way to say thank you to them for sharing. So it's not too late. You can still go grab a tea if you didn't get something. And also, you don't have to have anything. You can toast with a cookie if you still have it. It's Antoine's cookies. They're delicious. So our next storyteller, her chosen name is Hazel. She calls Redwood City home. She is a nanny and preschool teacher. Blessings upon her. The last song she listened to was Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash, thanks to the Stranger Things finale. She said yes because I wrote constantly as a kid and a teenager every day. Now as a working adult, she's really been missing it. So she said yes to write one down again with a deadline. So, with Hazel, take it away.
Thank you. The deadlines are important. That's really helpful. So this was great. I used to play at this old church in San Carlos with my little sister and our friends, and we played there really often, but we never knew its name. We just called it The Church at the bottom of the hill. At family parties, our parents would go into the garage and they'd play rock music, and we kids would fall asleep on the sofas watching the Disney Channel until it was finally time to go home, or we were at the church. We could barely see into the building itself, but we played games that we learned at summer camp, and fight over turns in the shade of the plastic playhouse that was set up beside the trash cans. And when we got older, we would climb on that playhouse and sit on its roof, and it burned our thighs and our little short shorts. And we bring our dinners to the church's parking lot and leave our plates of rib bones and macaronis and hardened frosting in the dark for some stranger who I now know was probably just a tired, trying, unpaid church volunteer on Sundays to clean up when the sun rose. I used to surf with my little sister on this huge puddle that formed like a lake in the backyard of the best house that we ever lived in. We moved around town every few years when we were small, but this place was the one that we really knew as ours. I'd Velcro this thrift store, boogie board to my arm and pull my sister in figure eights, dripping wet and wading in that muddy lagoon all the way up to my knees. We took turns pulling. We sang loudly. Rotten figs from the tree to the left and tiny flowers from the lemon trees to the right floated around all over our board. The rain fell and fell and fell and kept falling, and we weren't thinking about anything other than how much fun it was to pretend to be Susan and Lucy Pavensi in the rain on a Monday after school in November. I used to walk holding my dad's hand into my kindergarten schoolyard. I'd watch the clouds go from gray to white, dim to bright, and I thought that the sun was disappearing and then returning. I felt the pull of my dad's arm reaching down as mine reached up. The first day, the 100th day, the last day. I don't remember any of those very clearly anymore, but I do remember what my dad's hand felt like as we passed the house on the way with 30 some odd Santa Clauses on the lawn at Christmas time. I knew that house was an almost there marker, and my dad held my hand nice and tight. I live still in this town, in my hometown, a map of memories, really gone, but always mine. Now my family lives far away. I live alone, and I feel so old. But I'm so young. I'll never be this young again. But I'll never be that young again either. And I don't know how I'm supposed to live with it because I loved being a child. And doesn't every child dream of growing up, of being big and having this special job or a place or a purpose or feeling understood and knowing so many answers? When I was small, the job that I wanted was to be a cashier at Rite Aid. And that never came true. It's okay. But I didn't realize when I was small that growing up didn't actually mean any of that. I knew exactly who I was when I was 10 years old in a way that I don't anymore. Roller coasters? No. ABBA? Yes. Playing soccer? No. Playing dolls? Yes. Sometimes it feels so beautiful to have all this possibility and all this potential and all these paths that I could step onto. But lately the word that I've been using is devastated. I'm devastated that I'll never get to be a child again. I'm devastated by change, by the reality of pain, by the fact that following Jesus and loving God is not actually a recipe for easiness or happiness or a return to the simplicity of childhood that I didn't know I would miss this much on the other side of it. But I think maybe there really is a loving God. That I was made this way, made to miss these things. Because God returns what's lost daily, regardless of whether or not I think I deserve it or I'm ready to accept it. I see it in funny ways, in tricks of time. I never really did leave my childhood behind. I haven't left it. Not really. Fall of 2019 was when I started babysitting. I was barely 17, a child still, myself. And in 2022, I was a nanny in earnest, a babysitter with longer hours and a bigger impact. And still then, I was only 20, uninterested in late nights out, overwhelmed by dorm parties, at home with a smushy baby on my hip and a high-pitched toddler dancing circles around my feet in downtown Mountain View. In the family I've nannied for ever since, I'm both the second mom and the oldest sister. My friends call me a part-time mom. I teach preschool by day, and I bathe my little sisters and help the middle ones with math homework at night. I'm 23 now, old enough, maybe, not to be a child, but determined enough or aware enough or blessed enough by a loving God to gravitate towards the miracle of childhood fiercely and often. I still can't get it right all the time. With my oldest nanny kid, one of my exceptional sisters, I make the same mistakes my mom made of misunderstanding and pushing and pushing and pushing, even though I get it, even though I know how she feels in a different way than how my mother understood me as a child. But somehow she forgives me. She shows me the comics she writes, implores me, please ask questions. They also taught me how to climb trees again, and gently reminded me how to multiply 3-digit numbers by hand. The littlest after her loves my grandpa's cooking and shares with me a love for Upside Down by Diana Ross. The littlest after her takes real good care of Emily and Greta, the dolls that used to be mine. The baby who's not a baby anymore begs me to hold her when she'd be fine to walk on her own. I mourn, and I yearn for the joy that I knew when I was carefree and little in my backyard, playing with dirt and lemons from our trees. And I forget this often, but God knows that about me. And so he gives it back to me, not in the way I'd said I wanted. I wanted time travel, time freezing, time never moving again. But he gives it to me in the way that heals slowly and propels me into my own life, time passing. My grief, missing what was, is my love for it persisting. All of my sisters need me, and I need them. I'm happy, and I'm unhappy, energized and desperate, all in a day, all in a morning. I know that we all are. But I still get to hold my dad's hand sometimes. I still get to play on rooftops. I get to swim. I'm afraid someday it will change. I guess it has to. I guess I'll need it to. Things will change, my dad says. Things will keep changing. Where I used to pull the boogie board, I now push the stroller. My hand used to be the little one reaching up, but now it's the one reaching down, steadying hands so much littler than mine. For now, I have a growing faith in a faithful God who's closer to me than is my very breath. So somehow, I guess I'll grow up all right. Some of my sisters and some of my family are in the back row over there, and you don't have to look because it might embarrass them. But I love them so much. And I wouldn't exist as a bright person today without them. So thank God for my family and for yours. And especially for all of mine. Thank you.
So raise a glass to found family. That's nice. Found family. Oh, watch out. Sorry. Thank you. You can still work at Rite Aid. It's not too late. I don't know. I was trying to keep the dream alive. Our next storyteller is Brad Serrallo. He calls Redwood City home. He is a software engineer at LinkedIn. The last song he listened to was Cold and All Alone by MXPX. Wow. He felt, that was just dark. After your story, I was like, yeah. I felt like an invitation from God. He said yes because he felt like an invitation from God and that he had something for him in it. So, Brad, here you go.
Thank you. I'm going to put this down. I'm not really a crier. My family knows. The title of my story is Thinking Differently About How God Thinks About Me. I want to share a transformational experience that changed the way I see everything. But for you to understand this, I need to take you back. I'm the oldest son of an oldest son of an oldest son, the oldest grandson, great-grandson, and a long line of do-it-yourselfers. I was raised to believe that I could do anything and do it better than most if I just applied myself and worked hard. This wasn't just true about building my own house or fixing my own car, but about faith as well. I grew up with a very strong faith foundation in a family that studied and reasoned deeply about God, Jesus, and the church. And I had applied this to build a really strong framework for life that took the Bible and faith, reasoned about it, understood it, and built it into a set of rules, practices, and formulas that made life work for me. And that was working out really well. I was on the verge of 40 years old. I had a beautiful family, a growing career. I owned my own home, having built an addition myself, and had some college and retirement savings stashed away. I'd given much of my time and talents to my local church community, serving in various ministries and taking on leadership positions in the church. My faith had held strong through trials, like losing my mom to cancer when she was just 50, and weathering a deep season of grief with Stacy when she lost her dad at 58. Things weren't perfect, but I felt blessed. What I didn't realize at the time was that I had built my foundation of faith, life, and worldview on a prosperity gospel. Not one that believed God would make me wealthy and give me lots of possessions, but that God would give me a comfortable life. The formula was that I would understand and obey God, and in turn, he would bless me with peace, comfort, and an easy life. Then, on a nondescript night in 2015, as I was falling asleep, I jolted awake, heart pounding, adrenaline pumping, every one of my senses on full alert, and I didn't know why. Had I heard someone in the house? Had I forgotten something major that I was supposed to do? I racked my brain and could not think of a single reason for such a start. So I laid back down, and over the next several hours, tried to fall back to sleep, only to wake up a few hours later to start my day. This became an almost nightly occurrence, each time with no thoughts or worries in my head that I could point to as a cause. It went on for about 2 years, disrupting my sleep with these panic attacks, completely unable to understand what was happening. What I knew, based on my formula, was that the problem couldn't be on God's side of the equation. He is good and perfect, so it must be on my side. There must be something that I was doing wrong that was keeping me from experiencing peace and comfort. And so, as a prideful, self-sufficient do-it-yourselfer, I tried to fix myself. I worked and worked at applying myself to find the solution for my anxiety. This forced me onto an uncomfortable journey that, frankly, I was not at all interested in or open to. It was destabilizing for me, for Stacy, for my family, my job. Stacy was often worried about me calling friends for help. I tried prayer, spiritual warfare, therapy. The reality was there was no quick fix. I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me, and everything I built my security on had come crashing down, even though literally nothing had changed. On the bright side, my faith foundations led me to believe deeply that God was good. So I turned to him, and I had plenty of time for prayer since I was awake all night, every night. Slowly, gradually, over a long time, I learned how to pray. Not just to talk at God or to God, but to talk with him and to listen for his voice and to be comfortable just being with him in the silence. Through therapy, conversations with friends and mentors, reading strange to me books, and learning about contemplative practices that were awkward and unfamiliar, I slowly began to see that there was a lot about God and a lot about myself that I didn't remotely know or understand. It wasn't until I started to surrender my circumstances, to give up trying to fix myself, and accept where I was, that I began to make forward progress. It was in the beginning to surrender the core foundations of my identity that I was becoming open and available to receive something new from God. Fast forward to 2022, 7 years after that first panic attack, I was still in crisis. I wasn't stuck. I was moving forward, but excruciatingly slowly. Through this very intentional process of deconstructing and reconstructing my faith, I was learning new things about myself and about God, but I hadn't really fixed anything. While I was sleeping consistently again and more at peace with God in my circumstances, I was totally burned out at work, and my performance was suffering, which only compounded the stress, which only compounded the burnout. I needed more drastic measures, so I took a 2-month unpaid leave from work and joined a 9-month program called Soul Care. It was in the very first Soul Care meeting in September of 2022 that I was challenged to think about my posture before God, as if we were sitting in 2 chairs in the same room. How would the chairs be oriented? What would the meeting look and feel like? I felt like my chair would be facing God's chair. We'd be seated at a table and in discussion working things out. But I would be focused on the table and not looking at God in the eyes. This struck me and began a months-long wrestle within me of whether I could even consider looking God in the eyes. My faith and family foundations had certainly formed my image of God. I knew that God loved me and would work all things for good. And that knowledge had got me through a lot of ups and downs in life. But while I knew that God loved me, my image of him was largely as a disapproving father, one who had given me every opportunity and gone to the greatest extent to communicate to me what was right and good, and that I had no excuse when I missed the mark. I was afraid that if I looked into his eyes, I would see a look of disappointment. I was ashamed of not doing or being better. I felt embarrassed and unworthy. I was in crisis and felt the urgency of needing his help to solve my burnout, and I feared any lack of effort towards forward progress would bring my career tumbling down. On the morning of November 1st, I was trying to answer another soul care reflection question, which was, what happens inside you when you try to imagine a God who's crazy and passionate about you? After struggling for a very long time to answer this, God brought to mind a picture of a crazy football fan all decked out in face paint and going crazy for their team. This was absolutely shocking to me. It was a complete reversal of how I thought about myself and God. In fact, I had heard multiple sermons in my life about how I get more excited about sports than I do about God, and that I should be more fanatical about God and all that he's done for me. Yet this was the complete opposite. God was the one who was fanatical about me. Could this be true? Could it be that he was so fanatical that he still cheered just as loud if I was tackled for a loss, missed a field goal, dropped a touchdown pass, or even lost the game? Could he be so fanatical about me that he would reorient his schedule, make himself a spectacle, and even embrace the ridiculous just to demonstrate how much he is for me? I want to share with you a picture that I found to represent this image. I've looked at it almost every day since November of 2022 as a reminder. It's had a huge impact in changing how I think about how God thinks about me. I also want to give you permission to smile and laugh and giggle. It's okay. It brings me joy and laughter almost every time I see it. Here it is. Seeing this picture every day has changed my fundamental belief about how God views me. Not only has it allowed me to look God in the eyes, it has given me courage to let go of the control and security I so tightly grasp. It has given me confidence to face my fears: fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of depletion, fear of disappointment. It has given me strength to let go of false identities, that I'm defined by what I do, or by what others think of me, or by what I possess. I'm still in process. I'm still deconstructing and reconstructing. But this was a new beginning. And this has become my cornerstone, my new foundation, the center of my web. Thank you.
So let's toast to God being ridiculously fanatical about us. And it seems like there's some feelings about Ohio State in the room, so I'm going to just click to the next. There we go. Okay, our next and final storyteller. Her chosen name is Katie. She calls San Mateo home. She's a pediatric hospitalist, which means a pediatrician who only works in the hospital caring for babies and sick kids and their families. Her first response when I asked her was just to send a lot of vomiting emojis, literally. Just like, I asked her, and then she kept sending those same emojis over and over until I harassed her into saying yes. So the last song she listened to was No Scrubs by TLC. I approve of this message. So without further ado, please welcome my dear friend Katie.
Thank you, Lisa. Hang on, just gotta get myself ready. All right, so I'm Katie. I have two boys. Benjamin is 12, Sammy is 9, and I have a wonderful husband, Jimmy, who's sitting in the back. And I have been attending Dwell since Lisa's backyard. I was actually at the first story night years ago now, I guess, in Matt and Katie's living room. The room was packed, but our San Mateo homes are not that big. And I remember scanning the room, and I had this flashback to about 3rd grade when the class is reading out loud, and you start counting ahead the students to know if you're going to have to read or not. Fortunately, the Dwell community has shown up really big since then and expanded dramatically, and I've been able to skirt by until now. So thank you. I also am an Enneagram 6. This is pertinent to my story. This is a worst case scenario, need to be prepared brain. So at some point in the last 2 years, I've actually have a Google Doc opened with a sketch of a story that I wrote out of dread for when this moment might come. It's true. Ironically, this is not that story. All right, the other thing I'd like to share before I begin is that while this is my story and I'm being very vulnerable and sharing this with you all tonight, this is also my children's story, and parts of this they don't know. And that obviously means they haven't given me permission to share this, and so I just ask that everyone is really mindful and respectful of that. Okay, so with that, this is a 10-year story that I'm supposed to tell you in 10 minutes, and I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna share the bookends, and we're gonna fly through the rest. So 10 years ago, I had just moved from Syracuse, New York to San Francisco with my husband and toddler Benjamin for my husband to start his medical residency at UCSF. San Francisco was not where I wanted to go, but it was only for 3 years. It was a really hard transition. I didn't know anyone there. I wasn't familiar with the city. We rented a tiny place, sight unseen. I didn't have a job, and I was raising a wild toddler while my husband worked all the time. I eventually found childcare, got a job down at Stanford where I still work, and those things helped settle a little. We had our second baby, Sammy, in the summer of 2016. He was a joyful, easy baby, but life was very hard. I really struggled in the postpartum period. I was exhausted, lonely, overwhelmed. I had little help, and my husband was pretty absent. A few months later, I found out he was having an affair. In that moment, the floor dissolved underneath of me. I could not breathe, and the world was spinning. Little did I know this spinning, groundless feeling would define my next several years. This story probably belonged in last quarter's My World is Burning story night. And so I will spare you all of those details, but the end of that is that he ultimately chose the other woman, and it was followed by a traumatic divorce and a custody fight that just gutted me. This was not supposed to be my story. None of this was on my bingo card. I was not supposed to be in this crowded, tiny apartment in a California city. I was supposed to be in an outdoor place with lots of space and nature. I was supposed to be in a happy, fulfilled marriage. I was supposed to be having more babies. I already shared that I'm an Enneagram 6, worst case scenario brain. I have a plan for when I come across a mountain lion on my run. I know how I'm getting my children out of Giant Stadium when a bomb goes off. Unfortunately, I had not rehearsed the what to do when your husband has an affair and leaves card. I cling to safety and stability. I want to feel secure and prepared. I want to plan. I want to know how things are going to end. I want people around me I can trust because I cannot trust myself. I want guidance and certainty, and this experience was none of those things. But I am also a problem solver, an executor, and a figure-it-outer. So, as my world fell apart, I did anything and everything I could to create a sense of safety and stability for me and my children, which, if we're honest, this is just anxiety and control dressed up as responsibility, but it certainly made me feel better. I ended up moving to San Mateo, and San Mateo absolutely embraced me. I could share so many beautiful moments of God's grace and provision during this time, but again, I'm on the clock. A few weeks after moving to San Mateo, I worked up enough courage to walk into Menlo Church. It was large enough to stay unseen. They had great free coffee. The room was dark, so I could cry without being noticed, and my kids were taken care of. Honestly, it was a newly single mom's dream. One Sunday, Matt preached on the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. He said something about We're doing this practice of reading a passage 3 times, some Latin word, and he starts to read the chapter. And I was so hung up on this, I thought, no way we're reading this whole thing 3 times. I must have heard it wrong. And then he finished the first time and he starts again. And I thought, no, wait, the clock, literally in the church, there's a clock that's counting seconds. It's like mapped out to the T. I was like, no, this can't be right. Okay, so finally by the time he starts the 3rd time, my brain settles down and I was like, well, I guess we are doing this, so I might as well listen. What I heard in that passage, which I had heard many times, I grew up in the church, I know this story. But in those moments of actually listening, what I heard was that Jesus directed the crowds to sit down. They sat down and they received. They didn't have to line up or organize or plan or coordinate or create or do more or prove themselves. He told them to sit down and receive. I was supposed to sit down, and it was okay for me to sit down. This felt so radical to my holding it all together, white-knuckling, over-functioning self. I started asking myself in the hard moments, what would it look like to sit down right now? And this has stuck with me for many, many years and been a very helpful prompt. Life has so many hard and trying moments, but for me, the true exhaustion comes from trying to control what I cannot actually control. Here's the flyover of the next several years. Custody issues, financial stress, a pandemic as a doctor, that was stressful. Zoom kindergarten as a first grader, kindergarten in a first grade, that was even worse. The affair partner moved in with my children and I have to see her at events. An extremely challenging co-parenting dynamic, 6 different moves. Oh, and I started to try to date. It was a lot. I was also supposed to be healing during all of this too. I feel so fortunate, but by this time, I had lots of resources and support. I went to therapy, read books, listened to podcasts, had wonderful companionship and counsel from close friends. I worked on cultivating my gratitude, and by my 40th birthday, a year plus ago, I was overwhelmed by how beautiful my life really was, even though it was so far from what I had imagined. Despite this, I still had a persistent, strong desire for a partner and still dreamed of having more babies. Yes, I know this is crazy, but those desires never really quieted in my heart. I tried all the things to meet someone, apps, setups, going out, speed dating. I took classes, coaching. I even did an online manifestation class. And I prayed a lot. A dating coach that I followed talked about setting down the pen on your love story and stepping back and letting God unfold it for you. This sounds great, but I know this didn't mean that I need to sit back and wait for what I want to show up on my doorstep. Where was the balance between surrendering and still taking action toward what I desired? Through all these things, I did learn a lot about myself, my past, my patterns, etc. It was all very helpful, but I still didn't have the outcome that I wanted. Just over a year ago, November of 2024, Benjamin was sick at home on the couch, watching the Chiefs game, actually, and he fell asleep. I moved him into his room, and a few hours later, I found him unresponsive and barely breathing. Fortunately, this wild card was extremely well rehearsed, practiced, and even trained for. It's very different when it's your own child. We got to the emergency room, and the next few hours were a complete blur. They intubated him immediately and started trying to figure out what was wrong. I remember holding his hand in the trauma bay, and everyone was buzzing around, and everyone was buzzing around me, and there it was, sit down. By the next day, they had a pretty good idea of what was going on, and they started treatment. They took off his sedation, and they tried to wake him up. He did nothing. He had no response to pain. He didn't follow commands, and he wouldn't open his eyes. This was everyone's worst nightmare, and worse, you could see it in the eyes of everyone in the room. Despite this being both my job and my own child, there was nothing I could do. But I felt or heard this nudge again. Sit down. Sweet child, sit down. I walked out of his room and I sat down. And somehow, in that really horrible moment, I completely surrendered, and I felt the deepest peace. I knew that I was safe, and I knew that he was okay. I'm gonna fast forward on this one. He had this weird MS-like dramatic autoimmune thing. He received early and aggressive treatment, and he made a miraculous recovery. It was a long journey of several months of treatment, but he's doing great, and he has an excellent prognosis. The gift here was, of course, that my kid was alive and fine, which is not the outcome for many of the children with this same thing. But more impactful was that I finally experienced true surrender. For the first time, I really trusted God with my story. And yes, maybe this was because my hand was forced and I had no other choice. But regardless, I finally understood what setting the pen down looked like. And that was my new beginning. And this is where things get really good. A few months later, after the dust had settled and we were on a good path, I decided to re-enter the dating world. I still desired a partner and marriage and hopefully still more babies, but now these desires became a compass to guide my next steps rather than an outcome that I was desperately clinging on to. For the first time, I truly believed that I would be okay if I never met someone. I would be okay if I didn't have more babies, and this was so freeing. I re-downloaded the apps. If you know, you know. Within a few days, I see Jimmy. We had met previously in early 2020. I was actually dating somebody at the time on the brink of a breakup, and the pandemic was right around the corner. The timing wasn't right. His profile was super cute. I knew he was a good guy, so I left a comment. We had a little back and forth and eventually met up and attended an event together. It wasn't love at first night, but we had a nice evening. I knew I had to give him a chance and not get nervous and weird and run away because he didn't completely fit the person I imagined in my head, which is my old pattern. So I saw him again and again and again. And during this time, my protective worst case scenario brain kept offering lots of thoughts that previously would have convinced me to quit. But now there was an alternative, louder, overshadowing voice as well. Sit down, open your arms, receive the goodness. When I set my own thoughts aside and quieted all the squirrels and surrendered my story and opened my arms, my time with Jimmy felt calm and spacious and sweet and good and unburdened, just like Matt talks about here a lot. I had never felt this in a relationship before, but I knew it was God-given. We got married this past fall. Thanks. I want to be very clear here, and this matters to me so much. This is not a story where everything hard happened and then I met a man and everything got better. That's the patriarchy and Disney. This is also not a story of I finally listened to God and I got what I wanted. That's prosperity theology. My new beginning is not a clean page or erasing everything that came before or tying up the last 10 years with a pretty bow and setting it on a shelf. Jimmy didn't walk into a healed, tidy life. He walked into the middle of a very complicated circus, full of parenting challenges, custody issues, and some heavy grief. There are still hard days and lots of shadows from this past decade. My new beginning is learning to sit down and receive, intentionally loosening the grip on my own story, practicing surrendering the outcome and trusting that God will both meet me in the middle of my worst moments and also write a sweeter, richer story for my life than I could ever imagine. And there is such freedom in this, regardless of the outcome. But I also know that God desperately wants us to receive and cherish his goodness. We have to be willing to surrender our own agendas and sit down and open our arms to receive it. The great news is that our God is persistent and never gives up. We can never use up our chances to start shifting and receiving. And I know this because I actually met Jimmy not once, not twice, but 3 times before I was ready to receive him. I also know this is true because that other baby that I've longed and prayed for is arriving this summer. So, Dwell Church, I thank so many of you from the bottom of my heart who have been supporting and anchoring me over the last decade. There are many faces who have been through this journey with me. And I invite all of you to look for the places in your life where you can sit down and receive the sweet goodness from our God, who is the God of unending new beginnings.
To receiving God's goodness. All right, Matt, take it away. Try to follow that. Good luck.
Let's give it up for our storytellers. As Lisa said, Dwell Church is a new church. It's an experiment. Part of the experiment is to recover, to relearn that there's a God worth showing up for, worth giving our whole lives to, who can be trusted to care for us so that we can experience our lives in the care of the shepherd. I found when speaking to a truly intelligent, brilliant, deep, beautiful, rich congregation like this one, it's best sometimes to just show all my cards. So I'm a cisgendered white dude leading this church, and that sometimes it's helpful for me to just name that. And as a cisgendered white dude, something I do sometimes is think about Ernest Hemingway. He said two things that helped me situate this experience. He said, we'll talk about this in a moment, a lot of people are fascists and they don't know it yet. And I thought about that a lot over the past 2 weeks. Another thing he said is, some things in the world are too beautiful for the world to leave them alive. And that all of us get broken in some ways. But for some people, they become stronger in the broken places. There's a big bit of gospel in that statement. You and I, everyone in here, have been in the in-between moment where it could be something in the systems of the world that has broken us, or in our circumstances. Or sometimes we have just paid attention enough to the world to where we experience its broken heart as if it were our own. But the promise of the goodness of God is that he will be with us. I used to think that the gospel, maybe you have heard this before, was that Jesus died for my personal sins so that I might one day go to heaven, but it is so much richer, it is so much better, it is so much more expansive and majestic. It is that he has promised to be with us. And so we heard these beautiful stories of a story of deep compassion on our former selves, and a story of God healing us into ourselves. That's an incredible turn of phrase. And a flipping mystical vision of what God's heart is truly like. Have you ever had God just strike you with a vision where you're like, oh my gosh, I understand it all differently now? That's an incredible story. And a story of God being with us in a really messy moment. It was so generous of you to share with us. Thank you. Thank you truly. And as we think about the God who is with us in the messy middle, it has felt to me like our country is in the middle of something, a turning point of one kind or another. And I've found myself asking, how do we pray in these moments? And I find so many times people in my seat want to interpret or pretend they're an expert or say this is what it looks like in the future to solve these things. But I couldn't do that over the last couple of weeks. All I could say was, oh God, will you heal these broken hearts? There's just so many that we'll never know. And as Renee Good and Alex Preddy were murdered, we could only look on. What do we do? What is Dwell Church called to? What am I called to? What are you called to in a moment like this? I don't always know. But I do know that my job is to bear witness to a God who has been with me. A God that I've come to know and love and trust. And so I just keep praying, God, would you show me? Jesus, would you guide me? Shepherd, would you care for me in a way that I could bear witness to you in the messy middle? so that other people too might say, oh, I didn't give up. I kept going, I kept trusting, I kept learning, I kept growing. And that's what these storytellers have invited us to do. I want to invite you to a couple things coming up in the life of Dwell. Typically, I wrestle with the remote. Somebody gave me this fancy one. Look at this thing. Looks like a cell phone from the Matrix. All right, if you're new and you want to connect with Dwell, we would love to connect with you. We got this new fancy text message system. You can take a picture of this and text message it later. Text the keyword Dwell to 650-399-7238. That doesn't spell anything. It's just a number. Just a number. You can get on our newsletter, or I'd love to hear your story and see what God's been up to in the messy middle of your life. And then we got a lovely first quarter coming up. Story night, and then in 2 weeks, Super Bowl. I know a lot of you would rather be home rooting against the Seahawks, but appreciate that you came. February 22 is our second birthday and our first baptisms. That's going to be lovely. And then March 1st, friend of the church, Trey Ferguson. Look this guy up. He's the author of a book called Theologizing Bigger, which I personally love. And then finally, on March 8th, something really important in the rhythm of our community. We call it community discernment. We deeply need to listen to each other to learn what we are called to what Dwell is called to. So we've installed these listening structures. Community discernment is one of them. It's a group project. You sit around a table and you say, if your table had 4 weekends of Dwell Church, what would you do with them? Would you rent a pony? Would we go swimming? You could do anything. Let's talk about it. Let's dream together. Let's listen to the creative power of the one who spoke the world into existence. Community discernment is really fun. So if you're new, we'll put that slide back up. And for the rest of you, so grateful that you've been calling Dwell Church your home. So excited about what we are discovering together about what it means to follow Jesus in now 2026. Let me pray for you all. Jesus, thank you that you keep coming to us. God, that you keep working in us in ways that shock and surprise and sometimes delight us. Lord, we are in deep need of your Spirit to even understand you, to even understand ourselves. Jesus, that your Spirit has a revelatory capacity to teach us who we are, who you are. So for each person here, wherever they are in their story, would you call them deeper into themselves? Deeper into who you are, deeper into the world in which you have placed us to bear witness to you. Would you call us deeper, Lord? We lift our lives up to you. We're grateful for you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Amen. All right, my friends, that's all we have for you tonight, except for my favorite tradition. That's everyone helps clean up. If you're new to Dwell, connect with that. And if you don't have time or energy or desire to clean up, we'll see you next time.